Hello and welcome to my podcast, Nutrition Life Stories. My name is Caroline Payton. I'm a nutritionist and naturopath and passionate sharer of the power of nutrition. I want to reconnect people to the love of food, its sense of community, but above all else, its ability to nourish and heal the body. Well, I'm really delighted today to welcome my guest this podcast, who lives fairly locally to me. And I came across the work and the community work that he does in the past couple of years. But I'll let him introduce himself. His name's Tom, and I'm really delighted that he could be a guest on my podcast today. So welcome, Tom.
I'm a baker by trade. I'm a fifth generation baker, and Anna and I have been married 26 years. We've got 4 quite grown up teenager children in early 20s, and Milo, our eldest, has just finished his apprenticeship, so he's 6th generation baker. And I love food. I grew up above the bakery in Cirencester, Hobbs House Bakery. It's a 100-year-old family business, and what I came to see over my time there, trying to make the best bread I possibly could. I was part of the team that won Organic Loaf of the Year 9 years in a row, and then the 10th attempt was televised for a BBC programme, In Search of the Perfect Loaf. That opened up a wonderful kind of 7 or 8 years of doing TV work. My brother and I had our own TV show called The Fabulous Baker Brothers, and we went around the world baking and cooking, and ended up having most success in Southeast Asia and also in the States, where we made some shows. And what I noticed in that is, like, people eating together is the heart of the center of a lot of people's lives and what makes life joyful and worth living. And when there's an absence of that, we really suffer. And not just in the obvious kind of starving famine type way, but also in our society, the way we're isolated and eat poor quality things, and it impacts negatively. It's plain for me and others to see. So during that time, I started to do some charity work for a charity called Tear Fund, and went and baked and cooked in interesting places like the favelas of Brazil, where I learned about the circular economy, and in the slums of Nairobi. And most pivotal for me personally was with girls that escaped trafficking in Laos, helping them to see how learning to bake churros, something that's very cheap and easy to do with the ingredients they have there, could be a way of creating enterprise that allows them to stay where they are and less vulnerable to being trafficked. And that really got me thinking about, on the one hand, there's so many issues in the world that are food related: our health, loneliness, the cost on our planet, food waste, a third of food not being eaten but being thrown away. We literally, for anyone that even has a little bit of a look, have a very broken food system. And on the other hand, food seems to me to be such a powerful thing for bringing about positive change, if only we look at it with fresh eyes. And so 6 years ago, I left my family business, and after a year in the wilderness, trying different things out, learning about milling, fresh, just-in-time milling, which I think is super interesting and a good topic for a nutritional discussion. Writing a book about wild baking, so baking over campfires. So I've got a little book, which is part of the Do Book collection of work, and teaching people how to bake and cook. I found the team at the Grace Network, Will and his sister Jo Mansell, and they'd started with a food bank, and seeing that really they'd come to experience food bank as a sticking plaster, and so started the social enterprise, furniture bank, kids stuff, and some others, as a way of creating employment for people that are in need. And I went with them because I was curious about social enterprise and how different it is from both conventional businesses and charity, how it has something fresh to offer, with being both having like the body of a business, like paid employment and a concern for access, but at the same time has like the heart of a charity. So I met those guys. I kind of got a job sorting through donated kids' clothes, which was quite a massive change personally from, being whizzed around in, fancy cars, whilst being a TV personality. But there was something kind of like my soul needed. It felt edifying. Whilst the context was really tough, like very cold warehouses that we still is our context, there was something joyful and hopeful about the work. that encouraged me to be braver and more imaginative. Things that I think our society are at a crisis of imagination and hope. So I did this sorting through donated kids' clothes in a freezing warehouse, sniffing them for baby sick and sorting out the piles and trying to bring some process. I then did some van driving for the furniture project and learned by sitting alongside youngsters that had been in trouble with the police how, we can get great conversations going on, and doing good work is good for us, a bit like I found with the young women in Laos. I shared my dream of the long table, and they said, well, yeah, why don't you do it? We've got tables here. Let's push them together and put on a meal. And started the first long table meal. And that started with there was one that was brilliant. 81 people came from all over the country and said, yeah, that's amazing. You should do it. But I only was able to pay myself £125 for like a week's work. I was like, oh, it's not sustainable. So then I tried some different things 3 months later, and they became more and more frequent. And now, this year, 6 years later, we are a team of 25. We're about to double in size. We're on track to feed 40,000 people at the long table. Pay as you can meals made from scratch using the most nutritionally dense and locally and regeneratively grown produce that we can find. And it's a vehicle for training youngsters from difficult backgrounds how to join in and be a part of a team that's making something beautiful and delicious. And these meals are always pay as you can. So we don't have much choice. We always just have one bowl of food that covers most dietary needs, and then you can maybe add hot sauce or some slowly cooked beef or whatever on it if you want. So we've developed our own style of cuisine, and people come and they seem to want more of it, and the table's growing longer. And the long table has found its place amongst its sister enterprises, Kids Stuff, the Home Remedy, which is the new name for Furniture Bank, and Bike Drop. And then the long table itself has born out of that has been the Great Plate, which does over 1,000 school meals a day in the kind of way that we source and prioritize nutrition and fun engagement and delicious food. And that's just growing massively. And the Kitchen Companions, which is still in prototype form, but that takes frozen meals from Cook Foods. We haven't worked out how to make them ourselves, but they're a great partner of ours. And our companions go and sit with vulnerable people in their home whilst the meal's heated up. And that maybe takes 20 minutes to half an hour. And of course, the transformative effects of eating or being with people while you eat is seen very vividly there. So yeah, that's me. I'm one of the co-founders of that with my colleague, Will. We've now got this awesome team. We're about to open in Cirencester, as you mentioned. We've raised money and starting to build a team in Bedminster and Bristol. And we're excited to learn what's next. And with all that, I might just add, it's also been really full on and made me want to quit many times. And most of the time I have no idea what I'm doing. And a lot of the time it's terrifying. I wanted for myself a challenge that would really take me out of the comfort zone of being show ponied around and really get my hands dirty with work that felt meaningful. And to do that for me personally, staying true to the faith I've inherited, be on my knees in prayer, saying, like, God, show me how to do this. Yeah, sometimes you've got to be careful what you wish or pray for, because it's been one heck of a ride. Yeah,
I can imagine. Well, gosh, Tom, we could talk all day about your history, and if you haven't started writing a book about your life story, you really ought to. But gosh, well, where do we start with that? So let's just summarize, bringing right up to the current day so people have a better understanding. So I first came across the long table, which is just outside Stroud, about 2 years ago. I didn't realize that had been going for 6 years, the long table, by then. And I just love the whole concept of people. Well, the three things I think were, well, for me, really good quality food, at the heart, vegetables and nourishment and herbs and spices, and it's all local, isn't it? All local produce, which is so fresh and wonderful. I understand you also, you create employment through the kitchen as well, don't you? Which is wonderful. The fact that people just pay what they can afford is fantastic, because some of us can afford a lot more and others can't afford much, if anything. And you would never turn anyone away, would you, on that?
No, we don't. No.
And just sitting at those long tables and just chatting to whoever is around you. And I really believe, and I've talked before about, it is so important that we should be sitting down together and eating meals within the family, first of all, but coming together in the community like that. It's just wonderful. Some people are doing it because they're stuck working from home all day potentially, and they're not meeting people, and they're getting out and they go there for lunch and they come into contact. It makes you feel so much better, doesn't it, to have that conversation? And yet there are others who are really isolated, aren't they? And they just don't come in contact, which is brilliant. And what you just said about, I love that idea of taking, so cook, isn't it? Cook ingredients, I think you said.
Cook foods,
Cook foods, and going into the homes of people who can't get out, or elderly people, or people who can't get out, and sitting with them and having that meal. Yeah, that food is at the heart of bringing people together, isn't it?
We have this saying, amazing things happen when we eat together. We have so much evidence for that being true. People feel it when they come and eat at the long table. You look around, you don't know, like, people don't have badges or things on. You can just see who you're sitting with. That there's a great diversity of ages and what people might be able to afford. And there's this sort of, people being the ingredients that come together to make something, give a feeling to a place that can be hopeful and speak of abundance. Like, we have to believe there's enough to go around. And I guess my starting point was just knowing that a third of the food that there is never gets eaten. I'm thinking, well, if we started with like the best, not all of the third, because a lot of it doesn't deserve to be eaten, in my opinion, the hyper processed stuff that makes us sick, like, well, yeah, maybe that's only good for melting down again or whatever happens to that. There's good stuff that's that can be used. And so we partner with Fair Share. This is only a small part of our work. That's 75 kilos a week comes in, and we pay for that. And we never know quite what it's going to be, but there's some produce that would otherwise go to waste that we take. We have a food policy on our website, thelongtableonline.com, if anyone's interested, which sets out our approach to sourcing ingredients. And we lead with being highly relational. We pick first from the farmers and growers and producers that we know. But of course, because it's very seasonal, things aren't always available, but we cook with what we can get. And then if we can't get that, then we get some things from further away, like we use hodmedod's, which are British grown pulses and beans and things. So that's kind of dry store stuff that we can access. And then if we're still not able to find what we need, then we have some great wholesalers that are locally based that can pull in tins of things, and tomatoes and whatnot. Yeah, we found a way of approaching that. And it's quite a unique way for any chef, we found, because we have people coming from the hospitality industry wanting to join in with this work because of what we're about. I heard, because this happened to us just recently as we're hiring for Cirencester, they're amazed that we have 2 people on our team whose job it is, their food resilience teammates. That's their job, is to help us source and make sure that every mouthful of food at the long table is a vote for a better future. So we say feeding change one bite at a time, like whether it's where the food's coming from being great for the planet. And I'm talking to Coventry University about maybe doing a study on like how valuable this is to our local economy. Anecdotally, I believe it to be, because that's where our money is going. And then, so that's the kind of where stuff's coming from. And then the value of eating together, if you will. There's a lovely little story about like what this might look like. There's a woman that until a few months ago would come into the long table with 2 crutches, and because it's so painful to get around, she would just come and sit at the table rather than go to the counter and pay as you can for her meal and then go to the kitchen to collect it. She sat down, the team would sort her out, and sometimes she'd make a contribution. Anyway, one day she was eating her meal, and another woman joined her who inquired about her crutches, and she explained her situation. And this new woman is a local chiropractor, and she said, well, why don't you let me treat you? And she said, well, I couldn't afford that. So she said, well, why don't we do it pay as you can, like the long table does? And so we've sort of made space for this culture to emerge of reciprocity, would just make that possible. And now those two women have become great friends, and they come in every Wednesday and play table tennis, and she no longer needs the crutches.
Gosh.
And so whilst that wasn't so much to do with us, we facilitated that possibility. And people have fallen in love with the long table. We've had 3 weddings, not private weddings, ones where people want to be in and part of what we do. Because why not? Community, for those that have felt loneliness or a sense of wanting to be more connected, the opportunity to join with a community of people that are trying to do things in a fresh and more regenerative, hopeful way is quite compelling, I think.
And I think just that whole concept, because some people are very shy. So some people are like, will be alone, but they don't always, they might be a bit shy. If you would never want to go and sit in a restaurant on your own, for example.
No,
But with
right.
something like that, you just don't mind just turning up. Everyone makes you feel welcome. Like you said, they are long benches, long
Yeah,
tables that you sit
yeah,
at. You just perch down next to everybody else because everyone's together. You're not all
yeah,
sitting on separate tables. So it's no awkwardness there. The other aspect for me that's brilliant is around this seasonality of food because you're getting it from local producers.
yeah,
Because we've become so disconnected from eating with the seasons, and as a naturopath, a nutritionist, that's fundamentally what we should do.
yeah,
I'm not going to profess that that's all I'm ever doing, but
yeah,
I do. We should be eating with the seasons. We're supposed to be, as humans, eating with whatever is seasonal produce, and yet we think we can eat green beans from Kenya and all year round.
right.
That's the right thing to do. And the nutritional status of food like that cannot be anywhere near as good. And getting things locally and in season.
Yeah, and that's before you even get on to like the human welfare
Oh,
conditions around that. Like, I feel like I've seen too much myself to
sure.
easily turn a blind eye to that. And of course, so and anyway, not to like call you out on this, but like if we take the should that we feel for ourselves, the kind of guilt and shame around like we know too much, and yet it's difficult to always live up to our high expectations we have on ourselves, and then you end up like, oh, that can create anxiety and things like that. I think there's an even better thing that food has to offer, that like if it's seasonal, not only might it be more nutritionally beneficial, but freshness and the sense of care and concern about where it's come from, and that being relational. Like we know the farmers. There's some farms we work with that pay their the growers and pickers a salary, which is almost unheard of, and because of the care and the attention, and then because however you want to say it, if you then cook with love or certainly care and concern, which might be near enough, because we're just doing one thing, we get to really give it attention and think, okay, how can we make this shine? That it's really for us to screw it up. Like if you're working with great local, fresh in-season ingredients, and there's an intentionality about that, then it ought to also be really delicious. And then that's a big reason for people choosing the food that we offer and seasoning well and offering nice bits to garnish it. That I think it takes the should out of like eating well, because if it's a delicious pez you can offer, in a way we're removing some of the barriers to access to quality food, and actually making it compelling.
Yeah, I would say it's easy for me to say that putting vegetables together, adding some herbs, spices will
Mm,
always create something really delicious. And hopefully you're also inspiring people when they come and eat with you that actually, gosh, actually this is delicious, but it's some tomatoes and there's some onions in it, and I can see a few
yeah,
herbs and whatever else. I could do this myself, and hopefully it would inspire people to go home and also think about doing that
right,
themselves. Because a lot
right,
of people think this have forgotten how to cook and they think it's really complicated, and it really doesn't need to be complicated. Putting some food together, we watch all these, well, some people do watch all these cooking programs on TV and making
yeah,
complicated dishes, and it doesn't need to be like that at all to put some
yeah,
good things together. And at
yeah,
the end of the day, we need to get people just eating proper food, and it doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be expensive. When it's more when you buy seasonally and buy from farmers markets, not going to the supermarkets and getting away from all this processed food, which
Right.
doesn't make people feel better in themselves. And I don't think until people move away from those processed foods and start eating proper food, I don't think they realize how bad they feel in themselves until they move away.
Right. It occurs to me that like some of the like this might be super basic, but with teenage kids and then their friends and stuff, I see my fair share of what I would consider poor food choices. But let's take, for example, like a frozen supermarket pizza that you're like, oh goodness, it's not even like if you've tasted one from Naples or something, then it really comes up short. However, think, okay, well, you've got the oven on. If you've got, we've got some herbs that are repotted from the ones we've got from the supermarket in like a window box. So you don't even really need a garden. I find there's great, and with this, you'll see this in the long table setting that we have loads of potting containers. We take food waste, put them through a Ride-and composter with mixing it with sawdust from a local from the joinery shop just next to us, and makes this rich, nutritious compost. And then we put it in things like old filing cabinets on their side and just grow herbs everywhere. And there's a profusion of herbs. And so I find even if you take something as like uninteresting as a frozen pizza and then put some herbs on them and a drizzle of oil, then you find that the kids have got something that's like they can enjoy the communal benefits of sharing some pizzas.
Yeah.
And they've been like pimped or like rejuvenated or refreshed with something zingy, maybe some squeeze of lemon or grate some zest over it, just a way of zinging the thing up a bit. It still doesn't hide the fact that it's probably a crappy pizza, but there are some steps towards, I think, that are just there to make food more joyful and interesting and compelling and delicious. And maybe getting a start for some people, like, maybe they download an ottolenghi recipe and think, well, that looks good, but then get overwhelmed by it. I know that's sorry to chuck him under, but you know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
But then sometimes dumbing things down too much and making it too simple can make it boring. Whatever the start, I suppose there's invitation to always to be looking and thinking, I wonder how I can make what I do normally just a little bit more interesting.
I just love things like, a few chili flakes or some fennel seeds when I roast some vegetables, just brings it all to life a little bit more, which is brilliant. We'll come back to what you're doing in Cirencester, but going back to Hobbs House Bakery then, I mean, it's, like you said, it's still in your family, isn't it? You said now 5 generations.
Yeah, so 1920 was when we marked the start date,
But it's still part, so it's still part, although you've stepped away, it's all still part of the
family. My wife is a director and shareholder there.
Yeah.
And my son Milo is there. He's actually just got a visa to go and bake in Japan for 5 months. Gosh. So we're looking forward to hearing what he learns and picks up there. Yeah, so that's exciting. Actually, 1920, my great-grandfather, who I'm named after, Thomas Herbert, he was a blacksmith in Downhampton, and he married a baker's daughter. And in the Downhampton village story, so that's just outside Cirencester, isn't it?
I know it.
The land was owned by the co-op, and the co-op bought in their own blacksmith, effectively putting him out of business. He had 6 kids, they had hungry mouths to feed, and his wife, Mabel, convinced him to hang up his leather apron for a linen one, and we've not looked back since. And of course, it was a rocky, bumpy start, and my grandfather was part of that. He was one of the kids, and then he opened up in Bristol and employed people fresh out of prison, because most people don't choose to work night shifts or morning shifts. And some of them, given a second chance, went on to run hot bread shops, and he had 22 of them, and he grew 600 acres of his own organic wheat and milled it himself. Well, my dad and others helped him, but it became quite an enterprise. That split a bit, and a bit of that became Hobbs House Bakery. And so the long table, in a way, is just a continuation of that tree of, like, we bake our own bread from scratch. Often it's on the menu. We hold a space for, what part might bread have to play, particularly as we start to get into things like regeneratively grown crops and cereals for diversity of grains and things that can be good for us. And not always in bread form, but we have a little mill in our in our kitchen that we put seeds and spices and grains through. And we're working with exciting projects like Wild Farm, who are based near Swindon, and that's run by Andy Catto from Groove Armada. I don't know if you've come across their work.
No, I haven't come. Well, I'm going to just briefly mention he wasn't on the Jeremy Clarkson thing, was he?
Yeah, that was him. Yeah, the
Yes.
tool guy. So he's
Yes.
from Groove Armada. He's
Yeah.
super famous.
Yeah.
He got into organic farming, but had to work it out for himself because he bought some rubbish land in France. I mean, if anyone's interested, check out the story. It's really brilliant. But now Wild Farm has become 100 or more farms working together to grow regeneratively. So that's to say no chemical inputs, as in organic. I think there are differences with organic, so that I'll part that because that's a big whole topic that I don't know enough about. But it's really about working with nature. And anyway, there's like great diversity and biodiversity in those projects and some good yields with low inputs. We're just exploring what's the food scene that with the fields around us, like what are we part of here, and how can we connect farmers and growers and find ways of encouraging and sharing best practice, whatever that might be, such that we don't just continue marching towards ever less owners of land and ever more.
I don't want to get
factory-produced ways of doing it.
but I want to keep the land for farming and not for other use, really.
Yeah.
Keep the farmers and keep farming our land and producing our own produce. Well, it's been brilliant talking to you, but I want to just say, so people are aware, as we record this, which is October 24, you're very soon opening in Cirencester, which I think is really exciting. On Sirens, in the main part of the sort of high street marketplace, whatever you want to call it, in Cirencester. The whole concept of what you've done in Stroud with the long table and furniture recycling.
Yeah, Home Remedy, which is furniture, kids stuff, bike drop. We have a few other projects, irons in the fire, so things still to happen. In that old house of Fraser building that used to be Rackham's and other names going back to, I don't know, 1700s or something. The guys from the men's shed and the kind of repair cafe and stuff are taking some space on site to help us fix the space up. Nice. It's going to be fantastic. It would be a mistake to think of it as like a massive charity shop. It really isn't. It's a department store for the future. Department stores are closing all over the high streets, and we've got these beautiful old buildings that need to be reimagined. I don't know if it'll work. I wake suddenly in the middle of the night thinking of the hundreds of ways it could go wrong, but we've got a great team. Cirencester is a wonderful community. We're getting to know so many people there. We're hiring from the community, so that our work in Cirencester will be run by and for the people of Cirencester. Literally, it's owned by Cirencester. We've raised money from here, there, and elsewhere. The landlords who are there in Sweden and the Gloucestershire Diocese of Gloucestershire have and the local council have put in a pot, and by the time we open, over 1.4 million will have been spent on renovating that space. It won't look like it. Yeah. It's been a right old state, and the roofs have fallen in and have been leaking. But it's going to be amazing, and people of Cirencester and around engage with it. And so, if I can, I would just invite you, if you're hearing this and you're at all curious, come and eat with us. Come and see what we're about. If you've got great furniture or kids' toys or clothes you want to donate, or you've grown too many marrows or courgettes or pumpkins, we will happily receive those and cook them if we can. And especially if you love food and are curious to see how food might transform our communities, we're just getting started, and we need friends of the long table. So in Stroud, we have over 400 people have committed to being a friend of the long table. It's a financial monthly subscription. And last year, those people, their contribution covered the gap between what people could afford to pay for a meal and what it actually cost us. And without friends of the long table, it would not have worked. We believe we've got a really compelling offer to engage people with the discussions and feedback and talks and events and so on. Really enjoy the benefits of being part of a community. Some of that's financial. If people can afford to give a little bit, that will help us to see that we can afford to pay people and pay people to actually work as well.
And they can find all this on your website, the Long Table online. fantastic website, tells you all about what it's all about and the ways people can support in various ways, financially or otherwise, both locations. So find out more about it. And I could talk to you all day, Tom, and I can see the enthusiasm comes out from you. It's just wonderful to see. And I'll be in Cirencester coming in. If I can do any talks in there.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, and been great talking to you, Tom.
Pleasure. Thank you so much, Lynn.
I really hope you enjoyed today's podcast. If you'd like to know more about the work I do, you can find me via my website, peytonprinciples.com, my YouTube channel, Peyton Principles Natural Health, where I have hundreds of videos, and on the usual LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.